My future mother-in-law accused me of baby trapping her son despite me not being pregnant, and my fiancé's lies made everything worse. So I, 30 female, got engaged to my boyfriend of 2 years, Rick, 26 male, 2 months ago. He and I come from very, very different families and backgrounds, and it was a little difficult for me to get along with his family. His mother, Helen, in particular, was the toughest nut to crack. Rick comes from a really rich business family, and, well, my dad was a high school sports coach, and my mom was a teacher in the same school before they retired. It goes without saying that I didn't have the same extravagant lifestyle that Rick was used to. Rick and I met through a mutual friend, and, well, I didn't intend on dating him initially because he was just 24. I was 28, so it felt a little weird, but he eventually wore me down, and we ended up getting into a relationship. It went smoothly for the first few months until he introduced me to his mother. To say that Helen didn't like me would be an understatement because she made it very clear right from our first meeting that she didn't just dislike me, but she also didn't trust me and hated me instantly. She told me that she believed I was a gold digger, and that was the only reason I was with her son. She'd even commented on my age and said that she didn't see why her son would pick an older woman who wasn't even that beautiful unless he'd been trapped by me somehow. Rick wasn't in the room at the time, and I was so stunned that I couldn't even argue with her. I had nothing to say and didn't tell Rick until a few days later. And all he had to say was that his mother said that to all his girlfriends to test them. So I didn't need to take her seriously. After that, as well, Helen continued to put me down every time we met and just was as unpleasant as possible in general. In hindsight, I should have taken those red flags seriously back then, but I didn't, and that's why I'm in this situation right now. We dated for 2 years, and throughout those 2 years, there were several such instances where he simply refused to speak a word against his mother, even though she would constantly take digs at me and try to pick fights. With time, I stopped trying to make him see how messed up it was that his mother was always so cruel to his girlfriends, and I was so in love with the guy that I was practically blind to all his flaws and red flags. So I said yes when he proposed as well. And after we got engaged, something really started happening. All of a sudden, Helen was being civil to me. Not nice, but civil. Like she wasn't trying to humiliate me all the time, and wouldn't speak to me more than what was necessary. I thought that she'd finally stopped trying to break me and Rick up and had accepted that now that we were engaged, there was nothing she could do. That's what I'd thought, but around a week ago, that changed, and she finally returned to her old self. In fact, this time she was. Much worse, because while at other times she would restrict herself to insulting me only when I was visiting her, but this time she actually showed up at my place to accuse me of something totally ridiculous. Rick and I still live separately because I don't want to move right now, and my apartment isn't big enough for the both of us, according to him, so we're only going to move in together after marriage. Last week, Helen visited me, and she was hysterical. She was banging on the door and ringing the bell like crazy before I opened it, and once I did, she stormed in demanding that I leave her poor innocent son or else she'd take me to court. I didn't understand what she was talking about at all, and I tried to calm her down, but she was in no mood to listen to anything that I was saying. She kept accusing me of baby-trapping her son and said that she wasn't going to let Rick marry me no matter what it took. Then there were the usual accusations of being a gold digger. And this time she even said that if my parents had raised me right, then maybe I wouldn't be doing something as low as this. I couldn't take that and decided that I'd had enough and I'd heard enough. I literally pushed her out of my house and told her that she wasn't welcome here ever again, and that I would see to it that her son got to know what she said to me. Today, after she left, I called Rick up immediately to inquire about what the hell Helen was referring to. Obviously, I wasn't pregnant, so there was no baby trapping happening here. I asked Rick if he knew what was going on, and he told me that he didn't, but I could hear it in his voice that he was lying through his teeth. He just never had been the best liar, and so I insisted that he tell me the truth because his mother was absolutely hysterical that day. When he still refused to talk to me, I said that if he didn't tell me what he said to Helen, then the wedding was off, and I'd never speak to him ever again. That finally scared him into telling me the truth. He confessed that he'd made up the whole story about me being pregnant because otherwise his mother never would have approved of our marriage. And if he went against his parents' wishes, then he could lose his entire inheritance, which is something he can't afford to lose. It's a huge, huge amount of money, so he thinks it's okay to lie for it. Before he proposed to me, he'd asked his mother if it was okay, and she'd obviously been against it, but instead of giving up, he decided to cook up this story about me being pregnant. He told Helen that I was refusing to terminate the pregnancy and that to protect the family name and avoid any gossip and rumors, he absolutely had to marry me. Or else I might take this opportunity to talk crap about them and ruin their reputation. That's the real reason Helen had been so quiet and civil this whole time, not because she'd accepted our relationship. All of a sudden, his plan had been to convince his mother to stay quiet and allow the wedding to happen without much of a fuss, which is why he'd been rushing everything because obviously she would question his story if I didn't start showing eventually. And after a couple of months, once the wedding was done with, he'd tell her that I'd had a miscarriage, and then he obviously wouldn't be able to leave me because who would leave a woman who's just been through a miscarriage? Throughout, Helen had been bugging Rick to try and pay me off so that I'd take the money and leave them alone and raise the baby by myself. This morning, they'd gotten into a really bad argument about how to handle the situation, and Helen had left the house in a huff, but he hadn't expected her to actually confront me about this. I was stunned that he was going to such lengths just to avoid standing up to his parents, his mother to be more precise. He continued to talk even after he'd explained his side of the story, but I stopped listening because it was all just so ridiculous. He'd found it easier to make up a story about me being pregnant, rather than just being honest and telling his mother that he wanted to marry the woman he loved, and that was crazy to me. So, he kept talking and trying to convince me that he'd done this for our future, and I needed to play along even after this if we wanted to get married. I told him that after what he told me, I had no interest in getting married to him at the very least. I hung up after that and didn't respond to any of his texts afterward because I had nothing more to say to him. I blocked his number on all social media accounts because I didn't want to speak to him at all. I was really hurt and lost, so I kept crying that entire day, but I was determined not to get back with him. He wasn't the right man for me, and he'd proven it time and again. I could finally see all the red flags I'd been blind to for so very long clearly, and I couldn't just go back to ignoring them again. So, the next day when he showed up yet again and was practically begging me to forgive him on his knees, I told him that I just couldn't, even if I wanted to, and asked him to leave me alone. He refused to budge and kept telling me that the only reason he went to such lengths was because he loved me, but he also loved his family, and he couldn't just abandon them, and neither could he give up on our relationship. I was sobbing inside the living room while he begged me to forgive him right outside, and it took a hell of a lot of restraint. But I somehow managed to stop myself from instinctively forgiving him and letting it all go once more. After a while he left, but he still hasn't given up. It's been a week and he's still coming to my apartment every single day. It's like a routine now. He says sorry, leaves the rose outside, and then leaves. I ignored him for the first couple of days, but today I finally asked him how long he planned to carry this ritual on, and he said that he'd keep doing this as long as he needed to even, if it took him years. He'd keep showing up to apologize to me until I finally did forgive him, and that made me melt a little. He left after that, but I haven't been able to get him out of my head. In fact, every time I open the door, I see the pile of wilting roses and keep thinking about how big this pile might become if I don't forgive him soon. I don't know if he deserves to be forgiven, though, and I don't even know if he's being truthful about what he said. Maybe he actually will continue to keep showing up every day to apologize to me until I finally forgive him, or maybe he won't. I don't know, but what I do know is that I miss him despite everything that has happened. I know what I feel for him. Like, yeah, he has a lot of awful qualities, but he can change if he works on them, and he seems like he's willing to make it work with me. I just don't want to deal with his mother anymore. Helen is a total psycho, and while I do think that Rick can still change and has his redeeming qualities, I can't say the same for Helen. The fact that she was willing to bribe me in order to take my fictional baby away from her and her family is reason enough for me to believe that even if I do hypothetically get married to Rick and then get pregnant, she'll do her best to make sure I'm never happy. She's the nightmarish mother-in-law that nobody wants, and if Rick isn't willing to let her go, then with a heavy heart, I'll have to let him go. I don't know if his apologies and his roses actually do mean anything anymore, and I'm just so lost right now that I feel like disappearing for a few days just so that I don't have to deal with anyone right now. But I can't. That's why I'm here asking strangers on the internet for the relationship advice. So, AITA for dumping my fiancé because he lied to his controlling mother about me being pregnant just because he's too afraid to stand up to her. Update 1, so I didn't get back with him. I went through the comments on my post and I realized that whatever people were saying about Rick was true. Maybe he does love me, but he definitely loves his money and the lifestyle that he's grown accustomed to. He wasn't afraid of abandoning his parents because he loved them so much. He was afraid of leaving them because he loved his money way too much. He just didn't want to lose his inheritance, but he also wanted to get married to me without giving anything up. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but you can't have your cake and eat it too, and it's about time that he realizes this. I still haven't said anything to him, but he's continued to leave roses at my door, and now instead of saying sorry to me, he leaves a sticky note. I want to tell him to stop, but I don't want to talk to him because that will inevitably lead to another conversation about our relationship, and I just can't handle that right now. I've started working on a new project at work recently, and it's a pretty big responsibility, so I have a lot on my plate as it is. I don't want this crap with Rick to add to my situation. I need to be on my game right now, but I can't focus with this situation bugging me all the time. I know that the only way out of this is to just talk to him and let him know that no matter what he does, we're just not getting back together anymore. He's not willing to cut ties with his mother because he's afraid of losing his inheritance, and I'm not willing to become a part of his family since there's no way in hell I'm ever interacting with that psychotic nightmare of a woman again. She'll be my mother-in-law when hell freezes over. Neither of us is going to be willing to budge, so there's no point in dragging this out and pretending that this is ever going to work out. I tried my best to make it work for a really, really long time, but now that the veil has been lifted, I just can't go back to pretending that I don't see how he lets his mother control every single decision of his without a word. I cannot live with a woman like that, and I definitely cannot live with a man like him. I don't think there's any way out of this other than just talking to him and letting him down gently. I know he loves me, but if he isn't ready to put me above his family and his generational wealth, then this just isn't meant to be. Update 2, I unblocked him today and finally told him that I didn't want him to come around anymore. He sounded really thrilled that I'd finally called back today, but after I told him that I didn't want him to visit me anymore, he sounded crestfallen, and I just knew that he was going to cry. So I explained to him as quickly as I could. I just couldn't be with him given the circumstances. For him, his priorities were always going to be his mother and his family and his inheritance, and after that, it would be me. And I couldn't just accept that and be okay with it. I told him that I'd put up with his mother for a long time, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life always bowing down to someone else's will and doing whatever they want me to do. That's just not me. I believe that things would change with time and she'd maybe accept our relationship someday, but that's never going to happen, and I don't think he's going to try and change his mother's mind either. He's too scared of her and will never take a stand against her even for my sake. That's not the kind of marriage I want, and so it'd be best for us to part ways now. He tried to argue, but I said goodbye forcefully to end the conversation and then hung up because I don't think I would have been able to handle him crying. I've only ever seen him cry twice. Once was back when his grandmother had passed away 1 year into our relationship, and the second was when he proposed to me, and I'd said yes. That was it, and I'm a really emotional person, so if I see someone or even hear someone crying, I get very upset about it as well, and then we're both crying here. If I heard him out and allowed him to cry, then I would inevitably end up forgiving him and getting back together with him. Nobody knows how hard it was for me to even admit to myself that this relationship is now over because I truly believe that Rick was the one for me. All these fights aside, he did get me, and we did have our fair share of good times. This was also my longest relationship so far, which is a huge part of the reason why I didn't want to give up on him. I don't like giving up on people in general, and especially when I've already spent 2 years with Rick, I felt like I could make it work and come what may. I know now that I was wrong. I understand now that not everything is meant to be just because it seems perfect on paper, and maybe sometimes giving up is the right thing to do. It sucks, but it is what it is. Update 3, so today was insane. I'm writing this late at night, so I might make some mistakes because I'm exhausted. I came back home today after a really long and tiring day at work only to find Helen waiting for me at the door. She had her nose up in the air as if this place was beneath her, and told me that she needed to discuss something important with me. I didn't want to invite her in, but I didn't want her to cause a scene in the doorway since it had been difficult enough for me to explain the roses and the notes to my neighbors. And I didn't want to add screaming psycho lady to that list, so I invited her into my home, and she obviously made it a point to scrunch her nose at everything, even though my apartment is very clean and tidy. The other day, she was too hysterical and panic-stricken to make me feel bad about my apartment, so she was overcompensating for it today, I guess. Sorry, I don't live in a freaking mansion, Helen. After a few minutes of awkward silence, she finally got to the point and told me that she'd come here to negotiate. I didn't understand what she was talking about until she explained that ever since I dumped Rick, he'd been devastated and refused to do anything all day. He just sits in his room, plays violent games, and only comes out at mealtimes. She was afraid that he wasn't sleeping enough because he had dark circles under his eyes and had started looking very emaciated all of a sudden. So naturally, she was very concerned about his well-being and wanted me to take him back. She said that she was willing to make her peace with her only son dating someone like me. Yeah, that's exactly what she said, right to my face. If it meant that she'd be able to save him from spiraling into a depression phase, she said that she still didn't like me and didn't think I was good enough for her son. But if I was who he wanted to be with, then he could have me. She still did have a bunch of conditions, though, that I'd have to adhere to if I wanted to marry into their family. I'd have to change my last name. I'd have to sever all ties with my family. I'd have to let her raise my future kids because she didn't trust me to raise a child the proper way, and I also wasn't allowed to work anymore, and I'd have to lie about my age and make sure I don't look as old as I do. It was ridiculous enough that she was sitting under my roof and telling me what I was allowed to do, but then she made it all worse by saying that she was ready to shake on it if I agreed to her deal. And all the conditions that she just told me were non-negotiable. Okay, so first off, it was bold of her to assume that I even wanted to get married to Rick anymore, or that I even wanted to be part of her crazy materialistic family, and even if I did choose to go back with him, it would be on my terms only so she could take her deal and buzz off. When I said this to her, she got really mad and started ranting about how I was being ungrateful and that she'd been right in gauging what kind of person I was from the beginning itself, and once again, she commented about my parents and how they'd failed to raise me well enough. That was it. I refused to let a woman like her insult my parents and my upbringing again and again when her own family is that dysfunctional. So, I shot back saying that at least my parents still loved each other, unlike her husband who still spends all his time at work so he doesn't have to deal with her. She's the one who expects her son to treat her like her wife, so she should be the last person to preach about how families work. Instead of telling me that my parents should have raised me better, she should probably focus on keeping her own son under control, because if I wasn't wrong, he just lied to her for 2 whole months just so that he could marry a woman he loved. Me. It wasn't his love for his mother that had made him stay, it was his fear of losing the inheritance, so she needed to wake the heck up before she even dared to attack me and my family. And that definitely touched a nerve because she got really flustered and eventually started blubbering like a fool, which was pretty embarrassing to even watch. I told her to get the hell out of my house, and if she showed up ever again, I'd call the cops and make sure she lands up in jail, so she finally left, and I was able to unwind. It's been a few hours since then, and I don't think after today I'm ever going to hear from either Helen or Rick ever again. I don't feel bad for Rick because if he really does love me, then he could have just packed his stuff up and moved out of his mother's house the day she accused me of baby trapping him, the day all of this began. But he didn't, and even after that, he chose not to stand up to her, so clearly the money means more to him than our relationship ever did. The money was what he wanted, so he could keep it. I don't mind it anymore, and I'm sure it'll help him heal. So he can keep the money and his mother, and I'll keep my individuality and sanity.